Thank you, Dr. Mackey, and thank you, board members and attendees in today's meeting. I have a written report today. I'm just going to provide some high-level commentary about that report. This information will also be posted on our website shortly after our meeting. So, of course, we continue to need to be self-critical and look at the storm as a tragic event and an ability for us to focus on what we need to do to make things much more improved and to help prevent similar situations in the future. So we continue to have a lot of focus on answering questions, providing information, and we want to make sure that the board continues to get information about our portfolio, what we've did, what we're looking at for improvement, and we continue to cooperate in other reviews that are happening across the state, across the nation, and of course here for CPS Energy. In this report, what is focused on is we are looking at power generation in particular. There's a lot of work for us to look at our distribution system as well, and our communication activities, all of which, again, we look for things that we can do differently and better in the future. In this report, though, I'm going to focus on what generation occurred for us, and again, what we're looking at prospectively. So on the first page, I think the high note is that, again, you can look at this and, we are cooperating, we are working with different types of agencies, including the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which is a regulatory entity that provides us quite a bit of guidance, and they're helping, I think, ultimately to look at standardization across the nation and including Texas and the ERCOT system. What I'd like to point out, we did have challenges during the storm. There wasn't one technology that we did not have an issue with. We don't believe there's any villains in terms of the technology standpoint. All technology has their benefits and all technology has their challenges and issues. But when you look at our overall performance of how we came out, as far as availability of plants, we had about an 85% availability of all the plants in our portfolio. Go to the second page. Now, plant availability is one thing. The ability to be able to produce generation is another. Interestingly, our ability to produce generation was about 84%, so very close, a tight range between availability and production. It basically means that we lost about 16% of our generation. And if you look at the chart to the right, the smaller circle, it gives the breakdown of what those components were and how they relate to what we lost. From our perspective, I'll look around the chart overall. We had some electrical control issues, and that happens when you do have, these are basically big, complicated machines. About 41% of the outages on about 160 hours of lost production, about 42% came from the electrical controls issue. About 8.7% of that lost capacity came from the weather. We had some constraints, not very much, about 0.5% due to water constraints during the time for the plants. And the mechanical issues were about 30.3%. And fuel, the constraint or the inability to get natural gas to our systems primarily, about 18.9%. So we actually, over the time period, actually produced about 1 million megawatts of capacity when you add it all together, either produced or what we should have been able to produce. So it's a lot of hours overall. And then if you go down to the next chart, there are the plants that we maintain on a regular basis, but there are also plants that we contract with. They're basically our renewable PPAs, and then nuclear is actually managed by a separate entity. We own about 40% of the nuclear assets, but we do not manage those assets. And so you can get some additional information. Again, I'll provide them today, and then we'll continue to provide more information publicly and to the board going forward. On the next page, on page 3, for the hours that we were able to ultimately produce generation, you can see the ratio. And I think the interesting thing overall is this is just the allocation ratio, not the total per se from the focus, but the allocation of when you look at it by coal, nuclear, combined cycle, gas, steam, peakers are, I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, wind and solar. So you can see all of that in terms of production. Then when you look at the capacity overall, nuclear still, even though we had a plant go down in the middle of the event, about 88% of that availability was there. Solar and wind did not produce. Once again, they are primarily meant to produce in the summer. With the winter peak, they were not forecasted to produce very much, but it shows that's what we actually experience in the winter peak. And then you can see a breakout of the other performance areas. So we still did fairly well with our peakers, our combined cycle unit about 84%, as well as our coal units, but our steam units where we struggled more with the availability of fuel was about 70%. So there's production, and then there have been quite a few questions about emissions from the different types of generation that we have. And part of the thing that we went through when we were looking at the storm, it's important in some cases if you can have dual capacity production. If you could produce energy from both natural gas or oil, that gives you more flexibility. And we did, in some cases, try to get more oil to actually get more production. The most important thing was to try to get more production to keep people warm. Of the amount that we had that was lost because of the fuel challenges, and if you remember that other chart, from the total loss, about 160 megawatt hours, about 30,000 of those megawatt hours were lost because we had the constraint. We didn't have as much fuel as the plants could use to produce power. And so, but relative to the over 1 million hours of production, when you add production and the lost capacity, it was only about 3% overall. But that 3% mattered. And again, we're going to continue to look at what we should do in terms of having a dual fuel capacity and thinking about what really works in terms of keeping people warm. The couple of other things that I want to highlight for you is that we only have one set of our peakers that really has dual energy production. It's Milton B. Lee units, and their peakers are about 50 megawatts each, units 5 through 8. And they are ready to go and fairly functional. We did not construct peakers 1 through 4 to be dual fuel, and we have the capacity to look at our other plants because they either don't have good functioning systems or they were never designed to have that capacity to go back and forth. And it does take effort for the staff to move back and forth from one type of fuel to another. Some of the things that constrained us from using fuel oil in the past is it is more expensive. I'm on to page 4 now. If you look at page 4, there's a couple of bullets there, and it kind of shows you non-storm Uri prices, where in reality we pay about $3 per MMBTU for natural gas, but the natural price of oil is about $16. So from an economic standpoint, we've also been moving from fuel oil for some time because has just been normally the way the market works. That price, there's a ton of it, or many tons and units of natural gas. It's in the ground and it's available. So the abundance of it, the volumes of natural gas have made it what we typically talk about is the transitional fuel, the base fuel. The pricing has typically been good, and so we didn't have a lot of focus on trying to use fuel oil in the past. When we think about our pillars and think about reliability, though, I think we're going to have to balance between now and as we continue to move in the future. How do we think about optimizing fuel oil to some degree, particularly during a natural crisis, because production and reliability get to be a really important measure when we're in the middle of a storm. So if I go to page 5 of 9, a couple of things I just want to highlight. Here we are, we're in April, working through, as you can see above, the Flex Power Bundle and looking at that selection. We do understand that we're getting more questions about the Flex Power Bundle, and we have a session coming up with the board where we are looking to add a section and talk a bit more about the choices of what we're doing in this first version of the Flex Power Bundle. And I want to highlight, though, the Flex Power Bundle was designed to be a summer peaking product. The capacity that it was replacing are units that primarily perform in the summer. As we look forward, we're going to have to think about a winter peaking product. The green highlights to the right highlight if we want to, and we're going to bring some more information to the board and potential options to look at, wanting to switch and expand our ability to have more fuel switching. We really can't get to that and really be effective probably until the fall. We're going to have to think of a lot of things. We have to get through the summer and actually just produce, and we're really getting ready to hit the normal peak of the year. But planning, getting board input, putting options in front of you, the best time for us to do that is probably in the fall period, trying to get more prepared for the next winter peak. We're also going to have to look for funds and really think about, again, as we propose to the board and council, what do we need to move forward to make sure we're putting more investments in and thinking about options like this. And the chart below also just shows, when you look at it by a unit basis, we're thinking that the two primary segments of our portfolio are the other peaker units, Milton B. Lee units 1 through 4, and potentially our Arthur von Rosenberg units. Going to page 6, we've done some estimates. When we look at the costs associated with both retrofitting units 1 through 4 and actually buying increased levels of supply, that'll cost about $24.5 million. And that's on the Milton B. Lee units 1 through 4. And then the AVR units, Arthur von Rosenberg units, to be able to convert that, retrofit the units, and put in more supply, about $35.6 million. Now, there are other units to look at. However, if we can go back real quick to the prior chart. One of the problems that we have when you look at it, the Bronick units and the summer units, and potentially the spruce units, all of which we need to get board formal compliance with, really are looking like they can potentially retire before 2030. So we have to think about whether some of these investments to actually expand it to other units is a good use of money, or again, do we look at more flex power bundle options? I'm gonna keep going. Emissions, we have to think about that because we do have permits that allow a certain amount of emissions per unit. And it did happen this last time before Uri came, there was a slight relaxing of the emissions. But we have to be careful that if those relaxed standards don't occur, we could actually have environmental compliance issues where we can't keep up and limit ourselves, or we can't produce enough energy and make sure that we're not violating compliance issues. Again, the state was very responsive, but we're going to have to think about this. And I think if you look at it, you can compare natural gas just has lower levels of emissions when you look at the different types of emissions. So it does matter whether or not in the state there's an alignment about how do we handle this, particularly through the transition to different types of new and cleaner technologies. I'm going to go on to slide 8. My primary point, there's been a lot of questions about weatherization and what we've done. I'll have another document for you in May where we'll talk to you about the weatherization that we have done. We have done about $18 million of capital investments and about $3 million of O&M. And we're also in the middle of doing a bit more investment on the capital side right now. So again, CPS Energy did actually weatherize, and we're going to go back and look at where we had some challenges on freezing lines that froze, those types of things, but we did make those investments. We are going back now currently and looking at what we have for weatherization and looking at where we need to improve and where we can make enhancements in light of what we learned during the storm. A couple of highlights I want to, indicate to you is that we believe that ERCOT, the state, will come up with new standards associated with the weatherization. We think that we have to look at whether or not there was really a 100-year event or how frequently that event that happened in February 2021 would occur. That will change the standards. We managed to the standards at the time, and we believe the standards are going to change. We are staying in close contact with elected officials at the state level and with regulators in different agencies to look to see what might come out as true standards to manage to, but we're not going to wait for that. We're going to continue to look at what we have. We're currently putting in additional electric outlets and looking at our enclosure approach to what we did in the past storm to see what we could do to improve those and make them a lot warmer for our plants. We're also looking at our critical equipment list and spare parts inventory. Now, I'm now on the last page, 9 of 9. And looking at, again, can we reassess all our equipment to make sure that we are have all the right equipment as critical spare parts invested in and be even more ready for any future event. We're evaluating our enclosure plans to identify any sizing or composition changes. We're looking at more portable heaters. We had portable heaters during the event, but because it lasted so long, we think we need to put more investments in that and to really kind of make it a more efficient process. We're looking at how we store chemicals in facilities, trying to make sure that those chemicals are more closely and readily available to make sure that if we have to do any repairs or anything that makes the plants more operational, that we have them and have rethought the flow of having access to that. And then we're relooking at our staffing plans relative to how do we work during a storm and how do we prepare overall. So those are our Q date processes, and more information is coming.